The dog had been howling
What
for
is
3
it,
straight
boy?
days, and Cale Mercer was at his absolute breaking point. It wasn't the usual bark of a hound chasing a rabbit or sounding off at a stray coyote. This bark was different, frantic, desperate, and urgent, like Buck was trying to scream a warning that could flip their whole world upside down. But Cale couldn't understand what the dog was trying to tell him. The old, abandoned well sat out in the corner of his land, covered by rotting wooden planks that had been sitting there since before Cale inherited the farm from his father. Nobody had used it in decades. Nobody even talked about it. Yet every single morning at dawn, Buck stood right over those decaying boards, barking down into that pitch, black hole like his life depended on it. Cale had tried everything to get him to stop. He tied the dog up near the house, but Buck chewed straight through the thick hemp rope and ran right back. He threw heavy rocks to scare him away, but the dog just scrambled back a few feet and started right up again. He even thought about grabbing his shotgun and putting an end to the noise, but something in Buck's eyes stopped him. There was real intelligence in that look, like the dog knew something Cale didn't. The strangest part wasn't even the barking. It was what happened whenever Cale walked over to check on him. The second Cale got close, the barking stopped dead. Buck would stare at him with those big brown eyes, look straight down into the darkness, and then look right back at Cale. Over and over, like he was pointing right at something. Cale had looked down that well 100 times before. Just blackness, damp stone, and the stale smell of old water far below. Nothing special. Nothing worth ruining 3 days of sleep over. Until yesterday. When Cale finally decided to ignore the noise and walked away, he heard something else. Something that made 0 sense. When the wind died down between barks, there was a sound coming from deep inside the well. It wasn't an echo. It sounded like knocking, like someone trapped down there, tapping against the stone. Cale shook his head and picked up his shovel. He had crops to water and debts to pay. He didn't have time to chase ghost stories or deal with a crazy dog. But as he walked toward the fields, Buck's barking turned into a high-pitched scream. And then he heard it again, clear as day. 3 hard knocks from deep underground. Someone was knocking back. Cale dropped his shovel and rushed back to the well, his hands shaking. He'd farmed this land for 12 years since his old man died, and left him nothing but 40 acres of stubborn dirt and a mountain of debt. And he'd never heard a peep out of that well. Buck stopped barking the second Cale got close, wagging his tail frantically and pawing at the rotted wood. Cale knelt down and pressed his ear to the damp planks, holding his breath. Silence. Just as he started to stand up and call himself an idiot, it happened again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Pause. 3 more. What in hell? Cale whispered. He grabbed the edge of a rotted board and yanked. The ancient wood crumbled in his grip, snapping open a gap just wide enough to look through. A thick wave of air hit him right in the face. Not the stagnant water smell he expected, but a sharp mix of damp clothes, iron, and pure fear. Cale cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted down into the dark. Hello? Is someone down there? His voice bounced off the stone walls, fading away into nothing. Then, right when the silence got heavy, a voice answered, hoarse, tired, but unmistakably human. Help me! Cale jerked back so fast he nearly tripped over the dog. Buck let out a sharp bark, as if to say, I told you so. Who are you? Cale yelled down. How did you get down there? The voice came back, a little clearer now. Please, I'm hurt. I can't climb out. Cale's mind went into overdrive. That well was at least 30 feet deep, and those planks had been nailed down tight for years. How could anyone have gotten past them? What's your name? There was a long pause from the darkness. Then, a voice with a refined, educated accent floated up, completely out of place for these parts. My name is Clara Vance, and I've been hiding from some very dangerous men who finally caught up to me. Cale froze. Clara Vance. He'd heard that name in old local rumors, but everyone knew Clara Vance died 30 years ago in a carriage fire. That's impossible, Cale called down. I've seen her grave at the church. A bitter laugh echoed up from the bottom. That grave is empty. Mr. Mercer, I had to fake my death to escape the men who murdered my family for our land. I've been living far away ever since. But last week, word got out that I was still alive. Cale felt the ground spinning under his feet. How do you know my name? Your father helped me disappear 30 years ago, Clara answered. He was a good man who couldn't stand by and watch innocent people get slaughtered for their property. Everything clicked into place. His father used to tell dark stories about the Vance family. Wealthy landowners who owned half the territory before they vanished without a trace, leaving all their land in the hands of Bane Riker. Riker was the richest, most powerful man for 100 miles now. A respected pillar of the community who funded the local church and school. Mom, Cale called out, his voice shaking. If you faked your death, why are you down there? 3 days ago, a man came to my door asking questions about Clara Vance, she said, her voice straining. I knew Riker's men had found me. I came back here 3 days ago to retrieve the evidence your father hid. Deeds, witness statements, everything to expose them. But when I saw riders approaching, I climbed down here to hide, and the old rope snapped. Before Cale could ask anything else, Buck's ears shot up, and he started growling low in his throat. In the distance, Cale heard the dull thud of approaching horses. Cale, Clara whispered urgently from the dark. Riders are coming. Cover this up and pretend you never heard me. If they find me, they'll kill us both. Cale grabbed the remaining planks and started pulling them over the opening, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold them. 3 horses thundered into his yard, kicking up dust. Bane Riker dismounted first, wearing expensive clothes that looked ridiculous on a working farm, his 2 hired enforcers sitting tall behind him. Morning, Cale, Riker said with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. We heard there's been some commotion out here. Dog barking for days, disturbing the peace. Cale forced himself to stand straight, dusting off his hands. Just my dog chasing rabbits, Mr. Riker. Nothing to worry about. Riker glanced around the yard, his eyes lingering uncomfortably close to the well. Funny thing about that, we've been getting reports of someone asking questions about old land deeds. Someone claiming to represent the Vance family. The blood drained from Cale's face, but he forced his voice to stay level. Don't know anything about that. I'm sure you don't, Riker said, walking slowly toward the well. But if anyone did come around asking questions, I'd want to know about it. For their own safety, you understand. One of the enforcers, a scarred brute named Cutter, dismounted and walked over toward the barn. Suddenly, a horse whinnied from behind the stables, an animal that didn't belong to Cale. Cutter stopped and yelled, Boss! Shin found a saddled horse stashed back here. Fresh tracks! Riker's smile vanished instantly, replaced by pure malice. Well, it seems our visitor has been using your property as a hideout. Cutter, check that well. If Clara Vance is down there, we're going to drag her out. As Cutter marched toward the well, Cale snapped. He lunged forward and shoved the man hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back. I said get off my land. Cutter caught his balance, whipped out his pistol, and pointed it right at Cale's head. You just made a big mistake, farmer. Before Cutter could pull the trigger, Buck launched himself through the air, sinking his teeth straight into the man's wrist. The pistol went off, blasting a bullet into the air as Cutter screamed, swinging wildly to shake the dog off. Riker drew his own gun, aiming it square at Cale's chest. Call off the dog or you're dead. Before anyone else could move, a voice rang out from deep inside the well, loud and clear, carrying 30 years of pure rage. Hello, Bane. I've been waiting a long time to see you again." Riker went ghost white, his gun hand shaking violently. For 30 years, he believed Clara Vance was buried and gone. Now she was staring up at him from the depths of the old well, Shin very much alive and ready to settle old scores. "Impossible," Riker whispered.
"Shin, you're dead?"
"You made sure everyone thought I was dead," Clara corrected, her voice echoing off the stone. "Shin, and now I'm back to take back what you stole." Riker stared down into the darkness, his face twisting from shock into cold, murderous fury. "You should have stayed dead, Clara. Would have been a lot easier. Easier for you, maybe," she fired back. "But I spent 30 years gathering evidence of everything you and your brother did." Cutter, clutching his bleeding wrist, Shim stepped close to the edge of the pit. "Want me to finish what we started 30 years ago, boss?" "No," Riker said sharply, his eyes locked on the darkness. "First, I want to know where the rest of the documents are." "Everywhere," Clara called up, her voice ringing with triumph. "And if I don't walk out of here, copies of your crimes go straight to the governor." Riker didn't blink. He kept his pistol leveled right at Cale's heart, his mind working through the trap closing in around him. The silence in the farmyard grew heavy, broken only by the heavy breathing of the horses and Cutter hissing in pain as he wrapped a dirty rag around his bleeding wrist. "You're running a massive bluff, Clara," Riker said, though his voice lacked its usual iron certainty. "Even if you crawled out of that hole, nobody in this territory is going to take the word of a dead woman over mine. The judges know me. The bankers know me. The church praises my name every Sunday. They praise a ghost built on stolen graves." Clara's voice shot back up from the shaft, steady and sharp as broken glass. "And the moment the governor sees the signatures your brother forged on those original deeds, your entire empire is going up in smoke." Cale stood frozen between the two of them, his hands raised slightly. His mind raced as he thought about his father's old room inside the house, the loose floorboard by the dusty window that Clara had mentioned earlier. All those years he had lived in grinding poverty, breaking his back over 40 acres of dirt while a box of evidence sat gathering dust under his own roof. "Cale," Riker said smoothly, shifting his cold gaze toward the young farmer. "You're a sensible man. You've busted your knuckles on this dirt for 12 years, making next to nothing. Why would you want to throw your life away for a crazy woman hiding in a dry well?" "I ain't throwing my life away," Cale muttered, his jaw tightening. "Think about it," Riker pressed, taking a half step closer. "Help us handle this little pest. Keep your mouth shut about whatever nonsense she's whispering down there, and I'll wipe out your debts at the feed store. More than that, I'll buy your north pasture at triple market value. You can finally leave this miserable dirt behind." It was a staggering offer. 3 times what the land was worth. It would clear every single debt, pay off the back taxes, and give him enough cash to pack up and start fresh anywhere he wanted. For a split second, Cale looked down at the old well. 30 years of lies, a dead father who had carried a crushing secret to his grave, and a stranger who brought nothing but sudden violence to his doorstep. "Don't listen to him, Cale," Clara called out from the darkness. "He bought your father's silence with blood money, and the moment he deals with me, you'll be next."
"Loose ends don't survive long around Bane Riker."
Riker's expression darkened into a scowl. "Shut your mouth."
"You miserable cow."
He motioned to his second enforcer, Cole, who was still holding the reins of the horses. "Cole, grab that heavy iron chain from the back of my saddle. Drop it down the well. Let's see how much she likes talking when we drag her out by her neck." Cole scrambled to obey, unhooking a thick, rusted chain from his saddle horn and marching toward the open pit.
"No, you don't,"
Cale yelled. Before Cole could reach the edge, Buck lunged forward again, snapping at the enforcer's boots. Cole cursed, kicking wildly at the dog and missing. Distracted by the frantic animal, Cole stumbled over a loose rock and fell hard onto his knees, dropping the heavy chain with a loud metallic crash against the dirt. Cale didn't hesitate. He dived down, grabbed the heavy iron chain off the ground, and whipped it around, swinging the rusted links like a lasso to keep the men back. "You've gone completely mad, Mercer," Riker roared, raising his pistol higher, his finger tightening on the trigger.
This is treason.
"You're siding with a corpse against the law." "There ain't no law left in this county, and you know it," Cale shouted back, his heart pounding against his ribs like a sledgehammer. "You stole this whole valley, you murdered her family, and you poisoned my old man's mind with your filthy gold." Riker's face went purple with rage. The mask of the respected community leader was completely gone, replaced by the vicious land thief he had always been. "Then die with her." Before Riker could pull the trigger, a sharp crack echoed across the property line. A bullet whined through the air, clipping the brim of Riker's expensive hat and sending it flying into the dirt. Riker stumbled sideways in sheer shock, dropping his aim. Everyone froze, looking toward the main road leading up to the farm. At the edge of the property, framed by the dust of the afternoon sun, sat a tall man on a dark horse, holding a smoking rifle casually across his saddle. A silver badge glinted brightly on his vest. "That's far enough, Riker," the U.S. Marshal called out, his voice cutting through the heavy tension like a knife. "Drop the iron, all of you." Riker stared at the federal badge in absolute disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Marshal, you've got this all wrong. This farmer and some lunatic in a well." "I heard every word you just screamed across this yard, Bane," the marshal interrupted, spurring his horse forward as 3 more deputies rode up behind him, carbines drawn and ready. "We've been tracking you for a month. The governor received a sealed dispatch from California 3 days ago detailing every forged deed and mass grave in this territory." Riker slowly lowered his pistol, looking from the approaching lawman down to the open well. His face was completely drained of color, realization finally setting in that his 30-year reign of terror had officially reached its end. Cole and Cutter didn't even bother reaching for their weapons. They dropped their guns into the dirt and threw their hands in the air as the deputies swarmed the yard, slapping heavy steel cuffs onto their wrists. Cale let out a long, ragged breath, letting the heavy iron chain drop from his trembling hands. He wiped the sweat and dirt from his forehead, his legs feeling weak beneath him. Buck trotted over, sitting down right beside Cale's boots, and letting out a soft, satisfied whimper. As if to say the job was finally done, Cale walked slowly back to the edge of the old well, peering down into the cool darkness where Clara Vance stood looking up at him. The morning sun was finally breaking fully over the ridge, casting a warm golden light down the stone walls. "You all right down there, ma'am?" Cale asked quietly. Clara looked up, her tired face breaking into a genuine, relieved smile for the first time in 30 years. "I've been in worse spots, Mr. Mercer. But I think it's finally time I climbed out into the sun." The heavy iron winch bolted beside the well was rusted solid, but with the U.S. Marshal's deputies lending their strength, the drum finally groaned, turning with a shriek of tortured metal. Cale stood at the edge, guiding the thick hemp rope down into the damp abyss. It took nearly 10 minutes of careful hauling before Clara Vance finally broke the surface, blinking hard against the fierce afternoon glare after 3 decades spent hiding in the dark. She looked frail, her clothes torn and stiff with ancient dust, but when her boots touched solid earth once more, she stood tall. She didn't lean on anyone for support. Instead, she looked past the cluster of federal deputies, past the tied-up enforcers, and straight at Bane Riker as he stood in handcuffs, his expensive silver, trimmed coat now caked in farmyard mud. 30 years? Bane? Clara said, her voice quiet but carrying effortlessly across the silent yard. You thought you buried the past. But truth has a stubborn way of crawling back up through the dirt. Riker spat a curse at the ground, refusing to meet her eyes, while the marshal signaled for his men to haul the prisoners toward the transport horses. Take him to the territorial jail in Carson, the marshal ordered. And someone check that barn. The tip from California mentioned a secondary cache of ledgers. As the dust of the departing lawman settled over the farm, a heavy, surreal quiet settled over the property. The sun was dipping low behind the western ridge, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and bruised purple. Buck let out one final, contented huff and flopped down on the porch steps, finally resting his paws after 3 days of relentless vigilance. Cale wiped his hands on his trousers, feeling a strange, hollow lightness in his chest. For 12 years, this land had felt like a prison sentence, a stubborn, dust-choked trap he was forced to dig his grave in. Now, looking out over the open fields, everything looked different. The debt, the endless back-breaking labor, the ghost of a tired father who had carried a crushing secret to his grave. It all hung in the balance. Clara walked slowly toward the porch, her footsteps steady. She paused by the well, running a calloused hand over the weathered stone before looking over at Cale. "Your father wasn't a coward, Cale," she said softly, reading the conflicted look on the young farmer's face. "The night they killed my family, Riker put a gun to your father's head and made him choose between his own neck and mine. He helped me fake the crash. And then he spent the rest of his days paralyzed by guilt, hiding that tin box in his room just in case I ever made it back." Cale swallowed hard, a tight knot in his throat finally loosening. "I never knew. He just drank and coughed and worked himself to death because he thought he was protecting you," Clara replied, stepping up onto the porch. "And now, because of you and that remarkable hound of yours, the debt is paid." That evening, with the help of a lantern and a crowbar, Cale finally dismantled the loose floorboards near the bedroom window that Clara had described. Beneath the rotting wood sat a small, heavy tin box wrapped in oiled canvas. When he cracked the rusted latch open, the contents spilled out into the flickering candlelight. Yellowed letters, receipts signed in Riker's own hand, and the original, untainted land deeds granting the entire valley back to the Vance family. It was enough proof to dismantle every corrupt judge, banker, and politician within 100 miles. But as Cale sat at his small wooden kitchen table, flipping through the faded ink of his father's hidden journals, pages where the old man had documented every sleepless night of remorse, he realized something profound. The land wasn't just a burden anymore. It was cleared. The Kellers were gone. The debt was wiped out by the weight of the incoming legal restitution, and the 40 acres of stubborn soil finally belonged to him. Free and clear. Outside, the crickets began to hum in the long grass, and the cool night air rolled down from the hills. Cale walked out onto the porch, a warm cup of coffee in his hand, and looked down at Buck, who thumped his tail twice against the wood planks in greeting. The barking had finally stopped. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the farm was quiet, and the future was wide open.